My dear friends, I want to begin with a simple question. Why do we believe what we believe? Is it because we have seen it with our own eyes? Or because someone told us how to see it? For much of my life, I was told a story about Palestinians. Words like terrorists, danger, and hatred were whispered and shouted in every direction. But something inside me refused to be satisfied with second-hand truths. I needed to see for myself, so I went. And what I found didn't just change my mind, it transformed my heart. When I first arrived, I carried the weight of everything I had ever been told. I was cautious, guarded, and unsure of what to expect. After all, the stories I had heard painted a picture of anger, hostility, and danger. Yet from the moment I stepped onto Palestinian soil, everything I thought I knew began to crumble. The first thing that struck me was the hospitality, not the kind you find in polished hotels or arranged events, but a deep, sincere, almost sacred kind of hospitality that felt stitched into the very soul of the people. I remember being invited into homes that had been scarred by war, homes where walls bore the marks of conflict and windows opened onto lands fenced with barbed wire. But those same homes were filled with warmth beyond anything I had ever known. In those living rooms, I was a stranger not just in language and culture, but in history, in experience, in pain. And yet, I was not treated like a stranger. I was treated like family. Shoes were taken off at the door, arms were extended in greeting, faces lit up with genuine smiles that had no price. I was seated at tables overflowing with food, rice, lamb, olives, bread still warm from the oven, not because these families had abundance, but because they had generosity. Many of them had very little, some had lost everything, but giving for them was not measured by how much they had, it was simply who they were. I remember one evening in particular, an elderly man with kind eyes and trembling hands poured me tea from a chipped pot. He spoke little English, and I spoke even less Arabic, but somehow we understood each other. As we sat on thin cushions in a dim room lit by a single bulb, he told me through gestures and smiles about his life, his children, his lost home, his hope that someday things would be different. He laughed as he handed me the best piece of meat from the plate, a gesture of honor. He had so little to offer, but he gave me the best of what he had. That night, I learned that true hospitality isn't about impressing someone. It's about honoring them, seeing them, welcoming them into your heart, no matter the circumstances. Over and over again, I was treated not just as a guest, but as someone worthy of respect, of time, of compassion. I realized that in a land where so much had been taken, they still chose to give. In a life shaped by loss, they still chose to love. Their hospitality wasn't just cultural, it was spiritual. It was a reflection of a faith that teaches that every guest is a blessing, every stranger a trust, every human being a mirror of the divine. There was no cynicism in their welcome, no calculation, only sincerity. And with every meal shared, every laugh exchanged, every story told around a fire or under the stars, a wall inside my heart came down. I realized how quickly fear can build walls between us, and how effortlessly kindness can tear them down. What I saw among the Palestinian people was not the darkness I had been warned about. It was light. It was resilience wrapped in kindness. It was a hospitality that reached out across language, across history, across pain, and simply said, "You are welcome here. You are safe with us." And it was in those moments, humble, unguarded, and profoundly human, that I began to understand what it truly meant to belong, not to a place or a nation, but to the human family. And somewhere deep inside, a new belief took root not just in a people, but in the faith that shaped their generosity. It was then that I realized what I was witnessing was not an exception. It was the very heart of Islam. It was a living proof that even in the harshest conditions, the soul can choose mercy over anger, welcome over suspicion, love over fear. That kind of hospitality didn't just touch me, it transformed me. When I looked into the eyes of the Palestinian people, I saw something the news and the headlines never showed. An unshakable dignity, a strength carved out of suffering yet untouched by it. It wasn't loud or boastful. It didn't parade itself around. It simply existed quietly and powerfully, like a mountain that remained standing through centuries of storms. It struck me almost immediately. These were people who had every reason to be broken, displaced from their homes, living under restrictions, facing daily humiliation and hardship. And yet, they walked with their heads high. They spoke with a calm steadiness, a deep rootedness that no loss, no occupation, no cruelty could strip away. I met a young man, no older than 20, who told me about the olive trees his family had tended for generations. Those trees had been bulldozed, erased from the earth as if their history didn't matter. And yet, when he spoke about it, there was no hatred in his voice. There was only sadness and resolve. He told me, they can destroy the trees, but they can never destroy the land inside me. It wasn't just the land he was talking about. It was his identity, his pride, his refusal to let pain turn him into someone else. Over and over again, I witnessed this same dignity in the woman carrying bags of groceries past soldiers with her back straight and her gaze steady, in the old man who refused to abandon his crumbling home, insisting on planting flowers even among the rubble, in the children who played soccer in dusty alleyways, laughing with a kind of joy that even decades of struggle couldn't erase. Their dignity wasn't naive. It wasn't ignorance of their situation. It was a conscious, courageous choice to live with pride, even when the world tried to strip it away. It would have been easy for them to collapse under the weight of it all, to drown in bitterness or surrender to despair. But instead, they carried their history like a banner, not a burden. Their dignity wasn't just personal, it was collective. It was a shared understanding, passed from father to son, mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor. You are more than what has been done to you. There was one moment I will never forget. I was sitting with a group of elders in a small village that had faced repeated demolitions. I asked them, how do you keep rebuilding after everything is taken from you? One of the men, his face lined with years of both laughter and grief, answered simply, because giving up would be a greater loss than losing our homes. He smiled as he said it, not in defiance, but in deep acceptance. It wasn't about clinging to anger. It was about holding onto self-respect, even when everything else was ripped away. The world often mislabels this kind of strength. It mistakes dignity for stubbornness, pride for arrogance. But when you stand close enough to see it clearly, you realize it's neither. It is love. Love for who they are, love for where they come from, love for a future they are determined to build with their own hands, no matter how many times they are knocked down. This unshakable dignity is something you can't fake, something you can't fabricate. It is born from enduring heartbreak without letting your heart become hard. It is standing tall not because life has been kind, but because you refuse to let cruelty define you. Seeing that dignity living, breathing, unbreakable changed me forever. It taught me that real strength isn't in how loudly you shout your suffering. Real strength is in carrying your pain with grace. Real strength is in looking into the face of injustice and saying, "You can wound my body, but you will never touch my soul." It was there, in the silent power of their dignity, that I saw the reflection of something greater than mere survival. I saw faith, I saw perseverance, I saw a piece of the human spirit that no wall, no weapon, and no lie could ever erase. And in their unshakable dignity, I began to find my own. In Palestine, I didn't just hear about faith. I saw it living, breathing, moving through every corner of life. It wasn't locked away in mosques or reserved for special days. It wasn't something people pulled out only when it was convenient. Faith was everywhere in their words, in their actions, in their silent perseverance. It was not an abstract idea or a set of memorized rituals. It was life itself, stitched into every smile, every sacrifice, every stubborn hope that refused to die. I remember walking through streets still scarred from conflict, walls pocked with bullet holes, sidewalks cracked and uneven. And yet, 5 times a day, when the call to prayer echoed through the air, everything would shift. People would stop whatever they were doing, selling bread, fixing shoes, carrying groceries, and turn toward the voice calling them back to something eternal. I watched young boys washing their faces and hands at battered fountains, old men leaning on canes making their way slowly to the mosque, women arranging their scarves with graceful hands. There was no hesitation, no second thought. Their world was bruised and battered, but their hearts beat with a rhythm that nothing could break, the rhythm of prayer, of connection, of surrender to something greater than all their suffering. One day, I was invited to Friday prayer at a mosque near a refugee camp. It wasn't a grand, golden, domed mosque like you see in photographs. It was simple, humble, cracked floors, faded carpets, windows patched with cloth. But the people inside shone with a light that no building could contain. Shoulder to shoulder they stood, rich and poor, old and young, refugee and farmer. No one cared what you owned or where you came from. In that moment, everyone was equal before God. When the imam spoke, his voice wasn't filled with politics or hatred. It was filled with mercy, patience, hope. He spoke about justice, yes, but justice rooted in love, in forgiveness, in steadfastness. He reminded everyone that faith was not just what you believed, but how you treated those around you. That the true sign of a believer was not how high they raised their voice, but how gently they carried the burdens of others, and I saw it. After the prayer, people lined up to give charity, to ask about each other's families, to make sure no one went home hungry. Faith was not just words in that place. It was a living force, driving them to care for one another even when they themselves had so little. It was faith that gave an old woman the strength to smile after losing her home. It was faith that made a young boy share half his sandwich with another who had none. It was faith that held families together through sieges, through heartbreak, through endless nights of uncertainty. In every corner of Palestinian life, I saw people placing trust not in governments, not in weapons, but in God, in a justice and a mercy that might not come in this life, but that they believed in with every fiber of their being. Their faith didn't make them passive, it made them powerful. It gave them a resilience that no army could defeat, a hope that no wall could cage. I realized then that faith alive in action is not about escaping hardship. It's about finding meaning in the middle of it. It's about lighting a candle even when the night seems endless. It's about praying with broken hearts and empty hands, believing that one day, those prayers will be answered if not now, then in a world beyond this one. Watching them, I understood for the first time what it meant to live a faith that was real, a faith that breathed, a faith that moved mountains. It wasn't a faith built on comfort. It was a faith forged in fire, and all the more beautiful because of it. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew this was the kind of faith I had been searching for all along. Before I arrived, I thought I understood human nature. I thought that when people are hurt, deeply and repeatedly, anger is the only natural response. I expected to find Palestinians filled with rage, carrying the weight of generations of injustice in their fists. I expected to find people who had given up on hope, who had allowed bitterness to harden their hearts. I braced myself for walls of resentment so thick that no words could pass through them. But what I found stunned me into silence. Instead of hatred, I found forgiveness so profound, so courageous, it didn't seem possible. Over and over again, I met people who had lost everything: homes, land, even loved ones, and yet somehow, they chose to cling not to anger, but to grace. I sat with a mother whose son had been killed in a clash at a checkpoint. She showed me his picture, a young man with a broad smile and kind eyes, and she spoke about him with tears in her eyes. But when I asked her if she hated those responsible, she shook her head. If I allow hatred to fill my heart, she said, then they have killed me too. I choose to live. Her words were not just brave, they were revolutionary. In a world that often teaches revenge as the natural answer to pain, she had chosen something higher, something far more difficult. Forgiveness wasn't a sign of weakness here. It was the ultimate proof of strength. To forgive when you have the power to hate is the greatest act of defiance against a world that expects you to fall into bitterness. It wasn't that they forgot their pain. It wasn't that they excused injustice. They remembered everything: the loss, the betrayal, the endless injustice, but they refused to let it define them. I met an old man whose olive groves had been taken decades ago. The trees he had planted with his own hands, trees that had fed his family for generations, were now behind a barbed wire fence. I asked him if he ever thought of taking revenge. He smiled, a slow, tired smile, and said, "No fence can steal what God has written for me. My job is to plant, to pray, and to trust that justice belongs to the one who sees all." It was forgiveness, yes, but not the kind the world talks about, not forgetting, not pretending it didn't matter. It was forgiveness rooted in deep faith, in a certainty that true justice comes not from human hands, but from the divine. Even the young people, the ones I thought would be the angriest, spoke in ways that revealed a deep maturity of heart. They dreamed of freedom, yes. They fought for dignity, absolutely. But they spoke about their future neighbors, the very ones who had oppressed them, and said, "One day, we will live together in peace." That dream, after everything they had seen, everything they had lost, could only be born from forgiveness. I came looking for anger. What I found was love wearing the scars of pain. What I found were people who had seen the worst of humanity, and still chose to believe in its best. What I found was a forgiveness so vast that it stretched beyond reason, beyond politics, beyond human instinct. In every story shared over tea, in every smile offered to a stranger, in every broken-hearted prayer whispered into the wind, I saw forgiveness that no amount of injustice could kill. It changed me. It taught me that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering everything and still choosing mercy. It is standing in the ashes of dreams and still building a home for hope. And somewhere deep inside, I realized, this is what true strength looks like. Not the strength to strike back harder, but the strength to rise higher. Not the strength to win by force, but the strength to win by heart. Among a people the world told me would be consumed by hatred, I found a mercy greater than the mountains. And in that mercy, I found a mirror to a faith I had only just begun to understand. In Palestine, love was not something whispered or hidden away in private moments. It was everywhere raw, unfiltered, and defiantly alive against a backdrop of heartbreak and hardship. It wasn't the soft, polished love you read about in books or see in movies. It was a kind of love forged under pressure, like diamonds forming deep beneath the earth. It was fierce and stubborn, clinging to life even when every force around it tried to crush it. I saw it first in the families, in the way they held each other close. Grandmothers kissed the foreheads of their grandchildren with a tenderness that seemed to promise, "I will protect you with everything I have." Fathers carried sleeping children through long, hot walks home, arms aching but never letting go. Mothers served meals not just as nourishment, but as a daily act of hope, saying, without words, "You are worth fighting for. You are worth living for." Even amid the ruins of their homes, among the piles of broken concrete and shattered dreams, families built life again and again. They planted gardens in the smallest patches of dirt. They painted murals of freedom on crumbling walls. They named their children after prophets and virtues, after hopes bigger than the fences that tried to cage them. Every small act of living was an act of resistance, a refusal to let love be taken from them. I saw love between neighbors, too. It was in the way people shared what little they had. In villages where resources were painfully scarce, a loaf of bread was divided between families without a second thought. One night, I watched a woman offer the last of her tea to a stranger who had arrived late and tired. It wasn't charity. It was love that believed no one should ever feel alone. Love that believed survival was a collective act. There was love for the land, so deep it seemed written into their very bones. I listened to farmers speak of their orchards and olive groves as if they were members of the family. Trees weren't just trees. They were ancestors, witnesses to history, companions in struggle. When a farmer showed me the scarred stump of an olive tree that had been cut down, he didn't speak with hatred. He spoke with grief, as if mourning a brother. And still, he spoke of planting again, of life taking root where death had tried to reign. And perhaps most powerfully, there was love for freedom, a love so fierce it could not be extinguished even by walls, prisons, or decades of broken promises. This love wasn't loud. It wasn't about slogans or crowds. It was quieter, deeper, the love that fueled a mother teaching her son history by candlelight, that kept a teacher returning to a broken classroom day after day, that made poets and singers and painters create beauty even when surrounded by ugliness. This love was defiant because it refused to bow. It refused to accept that suffering would be the final word. It stood up again and again, even when knocked down 100 times. It whispered through barred windows and echoed in crowded refugee camps. We are still here. We still love, we still hope. It wasn't sentimental. It wasn't naive. It was love that had seen the worst of the world and still chose to exist. A love that refused to be beaten into silence. A love that was an act of rebellion in itself. Seeing that kind of love changed something deep inside me. It made me realize that true love isn't proven when life is easy, it's proven when everything conspires to tear it away. And you still hold onto it with both hands. In Palestine, I saw a love that rose like a sun after a long, brutal night. A love that dared to believe in tomorrow. A love that said, we are not our suffering. We are bigger than our pain. We are alive, and we will keep loving, no matter what. And it was in witnessing that raw, defiant love that I finally understood what faith in action really looks like, not only in prayer, but in every breath, every choice, every heartbeat. So today, I ask you, when you hear the labels others place on people you've never met, will you let fear decide your future, or will you have the courage to see with your own eyes? The world needs more bridges, not more walls. The world needs more listeners, not more judges. And it all begins when we choose to lead with heart instead of fear. Thank you.